Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be doing some essential fixes to our application. So we've made good progress so far, but there are certain things about the application that can be changed, that can be, refined. And just to list a few of them, what we want to do is make sure that only one window at a time comes up, meaning when I, in my application, say that I want to add a car. Let me just log in quickly so that we can see exactly what I'm talking about. When I say I want to launch the managed vehicle listing, I don't want to be able to click that and have so many instances of the same window open. So we're going to be modifying our application so that only one window comes up at a time. That's one. And another thing that we will want to do is to do our grid auto refresh. So we didn't get to do that, but we want to do that where if I add a new car right now, I don't have to come back and click refresh, but the grid should automatically refresh and show me the new car. Outside of that, anything else would just be refining the messages and the visual cues that we give to our users with each operation that they complete. And then we will upload our application to GitHub. So let's get started. I'm going to exit the application. And the first thing that we're going to tackle is opening one window at a time. Now, there are pretty much two ways to do this. One will help us maintain the MDI child pattern that we have been using, where when a window comes up as an MDI child, it cannot be moved outside of the main window. And the other one is to show it as a dialog where that window will appear. Nothing else underneath that new window will be active until that new window is exited, but then that's at the expense of it being an MDI child where it will sit on top. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. So let's start off with the manage vehicle listing, or rather, let us go to the main window, and then I will look in one of these. So I have this option here, this button click event where I said add rental record and add another one for the manage vehicle listing. All right. So I'm going to modify the add rental record button click event to show a dialog instead. Now, the problem with show dialog is that I can't set the MDI parent and then show dialog. You'll get an error. All right. So you can show an MDI child. So after setting MDI parent, it becomes an MDI child, and then I can show the window as an MDI child. However, I would have to omit or at least rearrange this line of code. So I'd have to put show above the MDI parent line, and I would have to say show dialog. So once it shows dialog, pretty much that show MDI, that MDI child setting, MDI parent setting gets nullified. It's irrelevant at that point. But let's see what happens when I show dialog. So let me start. All right, so we modify the add rental record, and so when I click manage rental records, that's that click event, right? It's this click event, add rental record. When I select that, notice that it is not an MDI child. This window launched well outside of the main window. However, I can't do anything outside of it while it is on the screen, and you can see it blinking. That each time it blinks, that's me clicking something inside of main window. So I can't move main window, I can't interact with anything, and as a result, only this window will remain active until I exit it, and then I can proceed with anything else in the application. So that's one very simple way of allowing or ensuring that only one instance of the window is open at any given time. Like I said, though, as you can see, the window operates independently of the main window, which may not necessarily be a bad thing depending on your objectives. So, I mean, in this situation, it's not a bad thing. I can move it around and I can't do anything else until I close it, right? So when I close it, then it's business as usual. So that's not necessarily the worst thing that can happen, really. So that is how you can go about ensuring one instance of the window is up. So if you want, you could change out all of these shows to show dialog. Once again, though, it has to happen before the MDI parent line, or else you get an error. So you could actually just remove this line where you set the MDI parent if you're going to be showing the dialog. However, I'm going to show you another method using the manage vehicle listing menu, click event. So this one now, it's going to be far more lines of code and a little more goes into the thought process. But the fact is that I will retain the fact that this window has an MDI parent. All right. So for the other window, which is manage vehicle listing. Sorry, I removed some code. I wrote the code already. So let me just walk you through it. So what's going to happen is that we're going to be checking all of the open forms in the application. So on button click, right? When manage vehicle listing, when that button is clicked and we're about to show, we're going to initialize, we're going to set the MDI parent, but then I'm going to also check to see if there is any open form inside the application. As a matter of fact, it's probably better I do all of that first, and then if there is none, then I initialize a new object and then show the window. So let's do it that way. All right. So the first thing I want to do, and then you'll see, if you research it, you'll see a number of ways of doing it. Some people use for each loop, some people use different methods, but the concept remains the same. I'm actually going to use LINQ because LINQ allows us to iterate through any list or collection, just like if we were using a for loop or a for each loop. So LINQ is not necessarily unique to only database queries, but if you have a list that you want to interrogate, just as if it was a list of records going from the database, it's a list of objects, you can do the same thing using LINQ anyway. All right. So the first thing I want to do is declare some variable. I'm going to say var open forms. Right. And then what I want to store in here is the number of all the open forms in the application. So I say application dot, and then I can use open forms. Right. So this is giving me a little collection now of the forms owned by the application. So the application is what comes up or what starts to run when we click start. Right. And then all of the forms or the open forms would be any window that is open at the time of it running. All right. So I say application.open forms, but then I want it in a kind of list of forms. So while it's open forms, as you can see, it's in a different data type. So I'm going to say dot and then cast, and I'm really casting it to the data type of a form. So I'm basically saying, give me a list of the open forms in the data type form, which is what I know. All right. So remember that everything is of the base class form. So I want all of them at the base class form. So it will handle that typecasting for me and then give me a list of the open forms of all of data type form. Now, after I get that list of the open forms, I'm going to declare another variable where I'm going to say is open. So var is open. All right, so this is really going to be a Boolean, right? So I'm saying var, but it's really going to be a Boolean. And I'm telling you this because of how I named it, is open. So usually with a Boolean, if you have noticed before, you can, take note of it now, that whenever I declare a Boolean, I say, is this or is that, right? And that's a common pattern in programming. So I'm going to say var is open, and then I'm going to say, give me the list of forms. So I'll say open forms and then say dot. Now, when I say dot, if you just look through this list, you'll see that all of the options that we had in LINQ are here and available. You have first or default, you have the where, you have the select, you have all of them. The one I'm interested in this time is any, right? So any allows me to stipulate a condition. Is there anything that has this condition? And it will give you true or false. All right. So I can say any, and then do up my lambda expression. So Q arrow and then Q dot. So I'm checking if there is any form. So if I say Q dot, you notice that all of these look just like the options we see when we are creating a new instance of a form, right? So it's the same thing. So I'm going to say if there is any form, and then I can do this two ways. I can say by text or by name. So I'll just stick to name. So if there's any form with a name, right, that matches or is equivalent to the name of whatever I'm about to bring up. So remember that the name of the form is pretty much the class name, right? So I can say, is there any form with the name manage vehicle listing? Because I'm about to launch manage vehicle listing. So I want to know if there's any form that is open that has the name of the form I'm about to launch, right? And then if it is not, or if not is open, I remember that this really translates to if is open is equivalent to false. So if it is not open already, then I will do all of this. All right. So this one has a bit more lines of code, but once again, the point is that we're just checking to see if there is any open form currently with the same name as the one I want to launch. And if there isn't, then I can go ahead and launch it. I don't need an else because it's either true or false. So if it's false, then we'll launch it. If it's true, then, well, we skip over everything and nothing happens, right? So let's try that one. All right, so I'm about to launch Manage Vehicle Listing. That's the click event that we just modified. So when I click Manage Vehicle Listing, it will launch the window. Notice it's still launching as an MDI child. I didn't change anything about the way it launched. However, if I click the button again, and I'm clicking right now, I see the mouse is moving and I'm clicking, you only see one instance coming up. That's because it is checking all the open forms and seeing that there is an open form with that name already. So nothing should happen. If I close it and then click it again, then it will work. And then every subsequent click does nothing. So we see that that is one way that we can retain that MDI child behavior, but ensure that only one window comes up at a time. So you can use either method. Like I said, the show dialog doesn't allow for the MDI child, but it does give the form that is launching kind of the autonomy of not being a child. But then based on your application flow and your expectations, then you can use either one that you wish. Now, moving on, we want to start looking at our grid refresh. Now, what we want to do is ensure that after we do like that add edit operation or a delete operation, that our grid refreshes automatically. So what happens right now is that when you add or edit a record, it will, say the success message, but then you still have to go back to the manage list. Let me just launch the application so we can see. Right. So like I was saying, we have to, when we launch manage vehicle listing, if I add a new car, right, then I will have to come back here and then refresh manually for me to see the changes. So I want to modify that after I add the car and I click submit and it has been saved to the database, that the grid refreshes. And I will actually be able to delete and remove the need for this refresh button. All right. So now we'll have to actually get creative, just like we had to kind of get creative with the login form, where when we were launching our main window, remember that we had to modify it to put in an object of the login form into our constructor so that we could manipulate the properties of the login form when we wanted to, which in this case was to close it. So what I'm going to have to do is whatever window is launching, or that manage window, so manage vehicle listing, I'm going to have to pass an object of this into the add edit window. All right. Or even if it's the edit, whichever one. But once I'm calling that window, I need to pass an object of this into that function call, into that constructor call, right? And then from this window, when it launches, I'll be able to, execute a populate grid function call. So I have a function called populate grid, which runs the query, to actually populate our grid. And right now it's private. So we'll just do the build out and we'll see all of the changes. So I'm going to do it with the manage vehicle listing, and then I'm going to challenge you to get it done with the rental records window also. All right. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is modify my constructors in add edit vehicle. So add edit vehicle had a plain constructor and the constructor that took an object of the car to edit. Now what I'm going to have to do is modify this so that I have my private property of type manage vehicle listing. So I'm making this global because I don't know when I'm going to need it. So I have to make it global, just like I had to do with the login and everything else that's up here. And then I'm going to call it manage vehicle listing. And then I'm going to tell this constructor, so I'll just copy this quickly, that it should take this constructor that had no parameters initially. It should take a parameter of type manage vehicle listing, and this one I'm going to set as underscore manage vehicle listing, but then the parameter won't have the underscore. All right, so either constructor is supposed to take an object of manage vehicle listing. Now I can modify this parameter and say something like equals null, which would then say that you may or may not need to pass a value in. All right. So to make it not a requirement, I can say equals null. So if you have to call this constructor, but you don't want to pass in that window or this object, then this would kind of help to ease the frustration that would happen at that point. All right. So I can do that for both of these parameters and just say equals null, just in case the person wants to call the add or edit constructor without passing in the manage vehicle. Sorry, I said user, but it's really you, the programmer, I'm catering to at this point. All right. So after we've gotten our parameters, we want to initialize our local or our private object that we just declared. We want to initialize it to whatever value comes in to manage vehicle listing. So if it's null, it's null. If it's not null, then we get an object, right? So manage vehicle listing is underscore manage vehicle listing is equal to that. And I'll just take this line and repeat it below. All right. And so whenever our window launches, it will have some knowledge of the manage vehicle listing window that called it. So it's easy enough to declare an object of one inside of the runtime, but then that each time we declare an object, it's a brand new object. It's not the object that exists. All right. So we want to make sure that we're tracking the one that exists or the one that called it, because we know that the one that called it is the one that is open in the background, currently showing the grid. All right. So I'm going to now go back to manage vehicle listing. And then I'm going to make sure that I just hold on control and click, and then I can just double click. So if you have more than one instances, it will kind of show you and double click which one you want to jump to. So then my function calls to add edit vehicle, or am I in add edit vehicle? Yes, I am. Notice that there is no error because I did set the parameter to be nullable, right? So because I set it to be nullable, and let me just change it around and just show you exactly what I mean. If I did not say that it can be equal to null, then manage vehicle listing, this constructor would then give me a red line, because then it's saying that it doesn't have a constructor that takes no arguments. It needs to pass in an argument. Because I said it can be equal to null, let me find it back. Because I said it can be equal to null, then I can proceed to make the regular function call if I want to, or the regular constructor call without passing in a parameter. All right, so that is one of those little things that I'm just showing you just in case that you want it to be more versatile. Either way, I'm going to pass in this. So this represents an object of the manage vehicle listing window that is making the call to add edit vehicle. All right. So I'll put this in for the add click, and I'll also do the same for the edit click. So you see the edit click is the same thing. It's passing in car, which is a required parameter, but it's not crying out about the manage vehicle listing. However, I will say comma this. All right. Now that that is done, what will happen is that when we add or edit the vehicle, once we complete our operation in this function call, right, the expectation is that our grid is going to refresh. So what I'm going to do is, before showing the message box and saying everything is completed, I'm going to put in a call to our object, so underscore manage vehicle listing, and then I would call populate grid. Now notice that I can't call it. It's not coming up in the IntelliSense. And even if I type it out, it's not calling it. All right. So what happens is that it is private. So it's private over inside of our manage vehicle listing. Let me see if I can find it quickly. It's private here, so I can't call it from outside. So if I make it public, then that problem gets solved. So I say public void populate grid, and then we'll be able to call it. So let's review the expectation here. When I click save on whether it's an add operation or an edit operation, the expectation is that we do everything that we know we do. We check if it's edit mode and we populate our object accordingly. So you see that we kind of repeated code and we kind of refactored that the last time. So we have a db save changes here. However, db save changes here. And I really wouldn't want to repeat those things all the time, right? So what I'll do is remove these lines of code. So I'm just refactoring right now. And then I'm going to take the same lines of code that were repeated and then put them outside of the check if it is edit mode or not, right? So we check if it is valid, else. If it is edit mode, then we want to do this. If it is not edit mode, then we want to do that. Either way, at the end of the day, we want to save the changes, populate the grid, and then show, and it will just make a generic message. Operation completed, refresh to see changes, and then we close. All right. So then what should happen is that when we click save and it does either operation, it's actually just going to populate the grid, call the populate grid function in the manage vehicle listings window. And remember that populate grid is what runs the query, sets the data source and all of the operations in between. And then that should trigger the refresh of the grid. So let's check that out. All right, so we launch our manage vehicle listing window. I click add new car, and then I'm going to say the make is Hyundai i20. This is a 2019 model. The VIN is, let me just put in something random. The year is 2018 and the license plate is that. We click save changes. It says operation is completed. Refresh to see changes. Okay, fine. But then look at that. It already refreshed for me. So I can change that message now. I don't need to tell them to click refresh. So I can leave the refresh button there. But the point is that the operation would refresh the grid automatically. All right. The same for edit. If I say I wanted to edit this and I wanted to clean up this VIN a bit because I put in the wrong VIN. All right. And then save changes, operation completed. Now you see the changed VIN going in and everything is happening real time. All right. So that is how you can do that grid refresh operation. So I did it with the manage vehicle listing. Well, I didn't do it with delete car. Let me make sure I did it with delete car. So I no longer have this car in my fleet. If I click delete, you see that nothing happens. So I click delete, nothing happens, no visual cue of anything. But if I refresh, you'll see that it disappears. All right. If I try to delete again, I would have gotten an error. So what we want to do then is make sure that our delete function tells us that the operation was successful and it refreshes at the same time. You may even want to give them a yes or no. Are you sure you want to delete kind of prompt? So I'm back in the manage vehicle listing. So initially I tried a refresh using this function, but that kind of does something different from what we want to do. So I'm going to remove this. And then what we're going to do is say, one, if the person clicks the delete button, we get the details, we get the object and everything. And then what I'm going to do is write some code. And I wrote it quickly, so I'll just explain it to you. So what we're doing is doing a message box that allows us to prompt the user, are you sure you want to delete? So when you click the delete button, it's going to retrieve the record. It's going to retrieve the ID and the record associated with the ID, and then we're launching a dialog box. Now remember that the dialog box is a box that comes up that prevents you from interacting with any other open window, right? So this dialog box or dialog result is the data type, and the object is DR, that's what we're calling it. And we're saying, I want a dialog result that has the value of a message box show. And then this is the message we're showing. Are you sure you want to delete this record? You can put in even more details in this if you want, because you already retrieved the car object. So you can say, are you sure you want to delete the car name, so to speak, or the car model, car make if you want. And then this is the title of the dialog box, which is delete. Then we say we want to show message box buttons, yes, no, or cancel. So when it comes up, it will come up with a yes, a no, and a cancel button. And then we're showing an icon that's a warning, or we're warning them, we're letting them know that they just entered the danger zone, right? And then after we've prompted them, we're saying if the result is yes, meaning they click the yes button, then we want to proceed to remove the car. All right. And then having removed the car, we can call populate grid. All right. And a spelling error there. So we can call populate grid, and then that should, refresh our grid. So let's try that delete operation. All right, so we're back, and I'm about to try to delete Toyota. I don't think Toyota has any rental records associated with it. I can always check. So I can always just go over, view the archive, and I don't see anything with Toyota. So I shouldn't have any difficulty deleting Toyota. I click delete, and then it's giving me that dialog box. Are you sure you want to delete this record? Yes, no, maybe so. I click yes, and then boom, it removes it, and then it refreshes the grid automatically for me. All right, let's try Subaru also. If I click no, then nothing happens. If I click cancel, then nothing happens. But then once I click yes, then it is removed. All right, so we just cleaned up our application a bit. We made sure that only one window opens, and we also put in some grid refresh capabilities into our windows. So I did it with manage vehicle listing. I'm challenging you to try and repeat those steps with the manage rental records. Either way, in the next video, we're going to be checking in our code into source control. I will have all the code ready and available and commented, so you can check the repository for the completed code in case you need